Good morning, this is Friday, and this is a new kind of video now. A new kind of video entitled Books I Am Borrowing, or Books I Borrow. I don't know yet what overall title I will choose. And the point is just to comment very briefly on some of the books I have just borrowed, which means that I haven't read them yet. Now, you know, there is a series of videos in French which is called Je rends des livres, where I talk quite at length about some of the books I'm about to give back to the library. And I do this in French because most of these books are not in English. Now, the reason why I am launching this new type of video in English is because the 4 books I have borrowed this morning are in English, and by the same writer, in fact, and this writer is George Gissing. Now, George Gissing is a British and English novelist of the second half of the 19th century, and I have to say that at this date I have never ever read a book by George Gissing. The reason why I am borrowing books from the library, books by George Gissing, is because my mother has asked me for that. Now, my mother has a Kindle, she's got an e-reader. I shouldn't be promoting a brand, but here I am. I have done it. So she owns a Kindle, but she doesn't really like it. I don't think she really likes reading on e-readers, and she prefers good old bound volumes. And so I told her that all of the novels by George Gissing were in fact available online and for free on the Gutenberg project or on Wikisource, but apparently she prefers books. So it's not a problem at all, because the library here has dozens of books by and on George Gissing, and no one really seems to borrow them. They really seem not to have been borrowed that much. Now, I said earlier that I have never ever read a book by George Gissing. I know of George Gissing, I know roughly who he was and what kind of books he wrote, but I've never really had to read them, and I've never really had to read his books, and I've never really felt like reading his books. And this may be wrong, in fact, because I was assuming that he was a kind of very old-fashioned academic Victorian novelist. Now, looking a bit more closely into what books he wrote, and in order to borrow some of these, there are a few things I have become aware of. The first thing is that he was born in 1857. Now, I was placing him far earlier than that. I knew that he had published a lot of books in the 1870s, 1880s, but I thought he was really old. In fact, he started publishing in the late 1870s when he was hardly 20 years old, and he died very young. He died at the age of 46, which means that he published or wrote almost 20 novels in a very short span, over a very short period of time. So he died in 1903, I think. This is what I checked on the Wikipedia. And so he was very young. So I have no idea really what I would think about George Gissing's work, but this is just to introduce these 4 books I have borrowed this morning. Books I borrowed just a few minutes ago at the University Library in Tours. So the first one is entitled Will Warburton. And Will Warburton is a novel that was first published in 1905, which seems a bit weird because he was already dead. I don't know. I didn't check that. One whose title is really fascinating is Yves Ransom, in French La Ransom d'Ève, which was originally published in 1895, and this is an American reprint that we have. And then 2 novels in the same collection, The Unclassed and In the Year of Jubilee. So this is also to tell my mother that these are the books I've borrowed for her and that she will get next week. So this will be my completely free present to her, thanks to the library. So again, The Unclassed, In the Year of Jubilee, Yves Ransom and Will Warburton. And tell you what, I think, try and read Yves Ransom. So I may be talking to you again about this novel. Now, I will read the beginning of the novel and discover it with you. Yves Ransom, Chapter 1. On the station platform at Dudley Port, in the dusk of a February afternoon, half a dozen people waited for the train to Birmingham. A southwest wind had loaded the air with moisture which dripped at moments thinly and sluggishly from a featureless sky. The lamps, just lighted, cast upon wet wood and metal a pale yellow shimmer. Voices sounded with peculiar clearness. So did the rumble of a porter's barrow laden with luggage. From a foundry hard by came the muffled rhythmic thunder of mighty blows. This and the long note of an engine whistle wailing far off seemed to intensify the stillness of the air as gloomy day passed into gloomier night. And this is very well written, at least. I mean, the title and the opening paragraph really make me feel like going further. So I will tell you more about that, possibly in a much later edition of this new series. Now, the last thing is, apparently, this is something I read on the Wikipedia again. I mean, it's not a very good source, or it's very derivative. But anyway, what I've read is that, according to a lot of late 19th century critics, just before he died, and he was really in his full glory, George Gissing was considered as the leading novelist with Thomas Hardy and George Eliot. Now, everyone still reads Thomas Hardy and George Eliot, or everyone should go on reading Thomas Hardy and George Eliot. At least they are considered as major novelists of the late 19th and early 20th century. Now, almost no one, I think, still reads George Gissing, so possibly this may be a good idea to just have a closer look. So, well, thank you, Mother, and, well, we will talk about that again.